First, some history and clarification. This war didn't start in February of 2022. It began in the early 1990s during negotiations over the reunification of Germany, when US Secretary of State James Baker and German Chancellor Helmut Kohl promised Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev that NATO would not expand eastwards. These discussions were revealed through declassified documents and part of a broader diplomatic effort to integrate a unified Germany into NATO, without exacerbating reasonable Soviet security concerns. However, these assurances were never codified by formal agreements of any kind, which allowed the US to ignore their promise entirely. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, NATO began to admit nations from Central and Eastern Europe, and now encompasses nearly all of the former Eastern Bloc, except Belarus, Ukraine, and Georgia, though not for lack of trying. Fast forward to 2014 in Ukraine after the Orange Revolution. The Donbas region in eastern Ukraine, characterized by a significant Russian-speaking population and industrial base, perceived the ousting of Russia-friendly President Viktor Yanukovych as a direct threat to its economic and cultural interests. The subsequent Russian annexation of Crimea in March 2014, following a controversial referendum, further raised tensions, and set the stage for a violent conflict. Local actors in Donbas, including former members of the security forces, aligned with Russian interests to oppose the new Ukrainian government. Russia conducted overt and covert operations aimed at destabilizing Ukraine to prevent it joining NATO, and their support for the separatists in Donbas included military equipment and strategic guidance. Ukraine's response to the crisis only exacerbated the issue, and the state's weakness, evident in its inability to integrate diverse regional interests, particularly those of the East, significantly worsened the conflict. Ukraine began receiving warnings from the US about a Russian invasion in November of 2021. Reports emerged of significant Russian military buildups near Ukraine's border, which led the US to significantly increase its intelligence sharing and consultations with allies. The NATO Secretary General asked Russia to clarify its military activities near Ukraine's border, pointing to an abnormal concentration of approximately 90,000 troops, a number that rose to roughly 100,000 by early February. In late January, the US cautioned Belarus against supporting any Russian military initiatives, since Belarus was hosting a separate large contingent of 127,000 Russian troops for so-called military exercises. Despite these foreboding signs of a looming invasion, there remained understandable skepticism based on previous instances where similar Russian military buildup did not lead to open conflict. To add to the confusion, the US track record of lying about intelligence to further a policy agenda isn't great, to put it lightly. Concurrent with all this, the US escalated its own military presence in Eastern Europe by deploying an additional 1,000 troops and several fighter jets to enhance its air defenses.
He said that line for you, bro. I mean, it's true, including, but not limited to, the Ukrainian officials themselves saying, like, everybody calm the fuck down.
In Romania and Poland. Aside from bolstering the defenses of neighboring...
It's correct. America says foreign adversaries are going to fucking attack every goddamn day. You know, sometimes they're right. This was one of those instances where they were right.
NATO allies, the US of course stepped in to supply Ukraine with the arms it needed to resist the invasion once it began.
You were so adamant. This is such a dumb fucking take, especially because it's been years at this point. Like, I mean, if you still want to fucking run that line, you can. I mean, yeah. You're right. I recognize that I was wrong. My career as a political commentator is pretty solid. If that's the one thing that people have, is that, like, I thought that it would be an unimaginable wrong and genuinely harmful for the prospects of Russia that they would invade Ukraine.
We can't give you an exhaustive list of everything the US has pledged or sent to Ukraine, but here's just a sample of what was included in the $800 million package from March 2022. 800 Stinger anti-aircraft systems, 2,000 Javelin and 1,000 light anti-armor weapons, over 20 million rounds of small arms ammunition, drones, grenade launchers, rifles, pistols, machine guns and shotguns, body armor and helmets, and myriad other pieces of equipment. Another security package worth $250 million included high-impact military equipment such as air defense systems, artillery, and anti-tank weapons.
The alternative was NATO infrastructure in Ukraine? No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. No, there is no fucking NATO infrastructure in Ukraine, especially when Russia had already annexed Crimea, especially when there was ongoing conflict in two Eastern Ukrainian territory, Eastern Ukrainian towns. Doors open. It was 100% sure, dude.
But these packages, worth over $1 billion combined, are just a drop in the bucket.
Oblasts.
Direct aid aimed at assisting Ukraine tops $107 billion. and the total figure of congressionally approved aid since February 2022 is around $175 billion. Non-military financial support has also been crucial, with Western governments and international institutions like the World Bank providing significant economic assistance. For example, the World Bank committed $13 billion to stabilize Ukraine's economy and support reconstruction efforts. However, as with all such help, it comes with the catch of Western neoliberal reforms and anti-corruption measures supposedly meant to address long-term economic challenges. Initial U.S. support for Ukraine against Russian aggression emphasized, quote, the preservation of global democracy and a rules-based international order. One major reason for the enthusiasm early in the war was Ukraine's significant progress in resisting Russian advances using Western military aid, suggesting this was a viable strategy for Western powers. Unfortunately for Ukraine, this overwhelming support would begin to fade on October 7th, 2023, for some reason. Anyway, since whatever happened on that date, Western governments have displayed significant apprehension, with numerous instances of delays and even reversals of aid pledges, reflecting serious uncertainty about Ukraine's prospects for total victory, a completely unified Ukraine. Western nations have struggled to maintain consistent aid. For example, the European Union promised to deliver 1 million shells by March 2024 and fell short, only delivering 30% of that. The Biden regime went from indefinite support to suggesting that the US will provide assistance as long as we can. And in a report titled Scenarios on the Russian War in Ukraine for 2024 and 2025, they outline scenarios where Western fatigue leads to a negotiated settlement, with Western partners pushing Ukraine towards a compromise due to a lack of visible military breakthrough. Slovakia, while advocating for Ukraine's EU membership and recently witnessing an attempted assassination of their prime minister, has shown hesitance in fully supporting sanctions against Russia, due to its dependence on Russian energy. France has sent weapons to Ukraine but has been non-committal about an energy embargo and has kept the details of its military aid opaque. Germany, heavily reliant on Russian gas, reversed its ban on weapons transfers but continues to avoid an EU-wide oil and gas embargo. In a bid to safeguard future aid, Western allies are considering moving the US-led Ukraine Defense Contact Group under NATO control to ensure a steady flow of arms irrespective of political changes within individual nations. To add to this uncertainty, a severe lack of timely and adequate shipments of weaponry have significantly impacted Ukraine's ability to counter Russian advances effectively. Crucial systems like F-16 fighter jets that were needed in 2023 will only become operational in 2024, by which time, Ukrainian officials say, Russia will have adapted its strategies to counter them. Western failures, such as the shortage of ammunition and delayed support, have directly contributed to Ukrainian military setbacks.
I hate this war because I've seen quite a few friends transition from being revolutionary leftists to weird Max Blumenthal, RWA, Russian nationalists. Ukraine is the colonizer, Russia is the colonized. Putin is always doing masterstroke weirdos. Yeah. It is a very odd attitude to have. I don't understand it. It literally doesn't make sense because Russia doesn't even the Russian government doesn't even try to claim that they are even remotely revolutionary, Marxist, socialist, and in any case, so I don't even understand why they would be so duped. And I think it comes from these leftists are most likely all in the USA. Yeah, I think it comes from just the understandable resentment that people have to Western chauvinism. Leaves no room for Western leftists to think about chauvinism in other nations and irredentist or imperialist actions from other nations that are also themselves capitalist. That's most likely where it stems from. On the one hand, you have the oligarchy of the United States of America. On the other hand, you have the oligarchy of Russia, a kleptocracy that is also hyper-nationalistic, engaging in their own violent blood and soil conquest in Ukraine.
That an additional 250,000 shells per month are needed just to keep pace with Russian forces. So, overall, Ukraine's prospects aren't looking good, and the West is at risk of losing yet another war. Here are just a few of the problems they face. The Kharkiv region has been a recent focal point of Russian advances. Despite fierce resistance, Ukrainian forces have struggled to hold their positions. Notable Russian advances have occurred near Kreminna and Bilohorivka, where Ukraine was unable to halt the momentum of the Russian 20th Combined Arms Army and other units. Intense bombardments, including a significant increase in glide bomb strikes, further crippled Ukrainian defenses in Kharkiv Oblast. The battle for Bakhmut presents one of the most intense and costly for Ukrainian forces. Elements of the 7th Reconnaissance and Assault Brigade and the 331st VDV Regiment have been particularly active in attempting to advance towards Kalinivka, northeast of Bakhmut. The sustained Russian assaults have led to incremental territorial gains for Russia.
Blinken said just a week ago that Ukraine will join NATO. Dude, oh, come on. Be for fucking real, dude. Like, yeah, so did George W. Bush on his way out, okay? Which kind of started this whole thing for both Georgia and Ukraine in general. They also said, we will supply you all the defenses necessary. And they also said, you're going to win the war. You're going to fucking purge all the Russian orcs. Not everything that the American State Department says is always going to correspond to the reality.
Russia in the region. Ukraine has also faced severe shortages of personnel. In the southern region, Russian forces have advanced in Donetsk Oblast, capturing key positions west and northwest of Bakhmut, including Bodanivka and parts of Chasiv Yar, a major defensive stronghold due to its elevation. Elements of the Russian 98th Airborne Division, supported by the 11th Separate VDV Brigade and 150th Motorized Rifle Division, have been particularly aggressive in their attacks near Ivanivska and east of Chasiv Yar. The Ukrainian military has also faced severe shortages.
I think the quicker you recognize that Russia's actions in Ukraine are not done out of some like symbolic realignment with a socialist cause attached to it, and is simply another capitalist nation run by oligarchs with a despotic madman leading the charge, a very authoritarian one, as a matter of fact, the easier it is for you to understand this calculation. Russia's actions against Ukraine are not inherently anti-imperial. It is not defensive. Okay. There are defensive measures that you can apply through trade and through developing trade relations, as Russia was doing, and making sure that European or American interference in Ukrainian affairs do not go beyond like the regular civil society organizations that they were propping up, and maybe some protests here and there, protests that turn into government changes and whatnot, but ultimately never direct NATO involvement, like building fucking missile bases pointed at Moscow. But NATO represents a threat to Russia. No, do you support NATO growing? No, it is because of that I think, on top of all of the cruelty and on top of all the violence, that I'm additionally frustrated with not only Vladimir Putin's actions, but also those who defend him. Because Vladimir Putin's actions are a gift to NATO. Vladimir Putin, by invading Ukraine and also showing that he was incapable completely of dismantling the Ukrainian leadership, basically show that he was in many ways a threat that needs security assurances against, while simultaneously showing that he's not that big of a threat that like other countries like Finland and Sweden, which had dual neutrality agreements with the USSR in the past, can actually go and join NATO without fear of like actual fucking bombing campaigns and actual on-the-ground military invasion. If Russia had the smoke for Ukraine, if Russia had the actual smoke for Ukraine and was able to capture Kiev, decapitate the leadership, and put in like some kind of, I don't know, military leadership or some kind of fucking pro-Kremlin leadership in Ukraine in a swift manner, as is the case with the military operation, special military operation, as was the ultimate goal of it, and could have immediately had air superiority, which they didn't, then the calculation would be very different from a realpolitik perspective. Okay? It would be different for Finland or all these other countries they would calculate the situation differently. They would look at it and go, okay, maybe they do have some smoke. Maybe we won't join NATO.
Of personnel. Efforts to staff new units have been hampered by the need for extensive Western military assistance to train new recruits. Meanwhile, there's strong pressure from Russian advances, which necessitate continuous replenishment of manpower and materiel, something Ukraine just cannot balance at the moment. To address this, Ukraine passed a new draft law on April 11, 2024 that aims to address the urgent need for more soldiers. The new law mandates that all eligible men aged 18 to 60 register for military service. It removes defined service terms, that is, limiting service to a defined time period, and it increases compensation for volunteers. The law also includes provisions allowing individuals with certain criminal convictions to serve, and mandates local government and police support in the conscription process. These changes have sparked significant public opposition due to concerns over indefinite duration of service, human rights, and the psychological impact on conscripts and their families. Russian missile and drone strikes have targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure, significantly disrupting the country's thermal power plants and leading to widespread power outages. Russian forces have damaged or disrupted roughly 80% of electricity generation at these plants, exploiting the degraded Ukrainian air defense umbrella to collapse the country's energy grid. This has further strained Ukraine's military logistics and overall war effort.
Like, they're not even remotely playing fair either. Like, Russia, I mean, in terms of, like, rules of engagement. The entire fucking country, for the most part, even including Western territory, is still seen as, like, fair play. It's just awful. Anyway.
As the energy grid's degradation has compounded operational difficulties and disrupted civilian life. All in all, Ukraine's prospects don't look good. It appears the West is willing to sell it for peace, and allow Russia to keep the land they took during their military operation. So, appeasement. French President Emmanuel Macron has indicated the possibility of deploying French troops to Ukraine. This potential deployment includes several scenarios aimed at bolstering Ukrainian defenses and deterring further Russian advances. One scenario involves defending strategic locations, like Odessa, in the event of significant Russian advances. A strong French contingent could be deployed to secure the strategic port city, ensuring Ukraine's access to the sea. Another scenario considers establishing safe zones along Ukraine's border with Belarus, securing critical areas and freeing Ukrainian troops for combat operations in the east, thus preventing new Russian offensives. One question we should address is, if Russian troops were to kill French troops in the Ukrainian theater of war, would that automatically trigger Article 5? Thankfully, no. And the key word here is automatically. First, French troops deployed in Ukraine without NATO's collective decision would not automatically trigger Article 5. France would need to convince other NATO members that the attack constituted an attack on NATO itself. Second, since Article 5 requires a consensus among NATO members, each member would need to agree.
I cannot comprehend a world in which this is seen as, like, politically appropriate by the overarching French population, that they go to Ukraine and fight against Russian forces in Ukraine and die in Ukraine. Come on, bro. Article 5 is a joke considering the Turkish perspective? Yes. Well, but you have to remember, that's Turkey. Second largest army in NATO, okay? So Turkey gets to do war on other NATO nations when it feels like it, including but not limited to French deployment in Libya, as a matter of fact. I think that there was some back and forth there too. It wasn't just Greece. A lot of people go, oh, well, what about Turkey and Greece? And it's like,
that the circumstances warrant a collective response, and given the divided political stances within NATO, achieving such consensus is unlikely, especially for a deployment not officially sanctioned by NATO. And third, historically, NATO...
Ukraine is lost, the West and especially Europe is desperate, they created a monster. That part I don't disagree with as much. I do think that the ground that Ukraine has lost genuinely is devastating for European considerations, for American considerations. It is a big blow to America's power around the globe. It certainly does not look good. America can keep saying, like, well, we're doing a war of attrition, we're destroying the Russian military, and not a single active duty service member is dying in the process. Is fucking awesome. But ultimately, it's not so awesome.
NATO has been cautious about direct military involvement in non-member countries to avoid escalation with Russia. So even if French troops were attacked, NATO might respond with non-military measures, such as more sanctions, rather than direct military retaliation. Ukraine's plight and likely eventual loss in this war marks another chapter in the decline of Western hegemonic power. Despite some surprising victories early in the conflict, Ukraine's chances of overcoming Russia's relentless advances now appear slim. The West's support, while substantial, has faltered.
What? Most of us in EU are together against Russia. I like you, but sometimes I think you don't understand how bad Russia/Putin is. They are like Israel to Palestinians. First of all, Russia and its actions in Ukraine are similar to Israel, you know, that's not like they are the invading party. They are the party that is in the wrong. But beyond that, if you think that like what Russia is doing to Ukraine right now is like, you know, is similar to, I mean, even on the metrics, they're not close. Putin is not good, but Putin doesn't have to be as bad as Israel to be in the wrong. I said last year when Ukrainian counteroffensive failed that Russia is going to hold on until the West loses interest. Russia wins here and has secured a land bridge to Crimea and Black Sea port. I don't know what these shadows want you to say. Why does Putin have to be Hitler for these people to support Ukraine? They want this because I mean, I think a lot of people, without considering what it means to go into all-out war with a nuclear-armed nation, just kind of want America to dominate. Maybe. I don't know. I actually don't know. I think that a lot of people are looking at this and going, no, Putin is Putler. He is like Hitler. You're appeasing Hitler. We have to fucking fight until every Russian is dead. I don't know. You called BB Hitler, Lamau? I mean, yeah. Vladimir Putin is a despot. He's very violent. He's ultra nationalistic. He is a fascist, especially, for sure. But yeah, I think that Benjamin Netanyahu and Zionism is a closer analog to the fascism that we saw in Nazi Germany than even the Russian ultranationalism is. There's definitely sex in Russian ultranationalism that is identical to Hitlerian politics.
Key military aid arrives late or not at all, and vital support systems are either inadequate or delayed, leaving Ukraine to fend off a superior force with inferior, dwindling resources. While NATO's eastward expansion, despite assurances to the contrary, sowed the seeds of this conflict, we want to be clear.
What? Israel's Ukraine in this situation? Hamas attacked first? Israel's defending itself? Wait, what? This is my favorite type of guy who is like, Ukraine is in the right, which, you know, I agree. And also Israel is in the right. This is directly mainlining American State Department propaganda. These are the most unique individuals. They are obviously the most common individuals in American politics in general, like those in positions of power, but they are the most unique individuals when you even look at like the American population. Like across the board, this is not like a universally shared value. Most people are pro-Ukraine and pro-Palestine in this situation. Yeah, it's Jake Sullivan in the chat.
Here that this does not justify Russia's invasion. It's simply the explanation given by Russia, and it's our job to report that. Regardless, the initial shock of Russia's invasion was met with global condemnation and a rush of military aid to Ukraine. But as the conflict dragged on and successes became fewer and farther between, enthusiasm began to wane. This shift became starkly evident after October 7, 2023, when the West's focus suddenly diverted for no conceivable reason, causing aid and support to Ukraine to become inconsistent. Meanwhile, Ukrainian ground forces faced severe shortages of manpower and ammunition, compounded by relentless Russian bombardment.
Pro-Israel and pro-Russia is the most unique one. Haven't seen that in the wild. That's one, the Republican Party. Okay. And two, everyone in Russia. And three, everyone in Israel. Not everyone in Israel, but most people in Israel. That's like that's a pretty commonly shared perspective in both Russia and in Israel, and also the American Republican Party to a certain degree. Pro-Palestine and pro-Russia is the rarest one, to be honest. It's the pro-Palestine, pro-Russia is the Jackson Hinkle, the Jackson Hinkle side of the equation. I would say pro-Palestine and pro-Russia also is like every non-aligned nation, most of the African nations, most of the countries that are like most of the countries that I would say are victims to American imperialism historically. Okay, you're exaggerating a little. It's mostly the Russian population in Israel. Most Israelis, especially liberals and shit, are pro-Ukraine from what I know, though I don't have poll numbers at the top of my head. Yeah, the BRICS enjoyers are the pro-Palestine, pro-Russia people. Pro-Palestine, pro-Russia is the Al-Mayadeen take. It's basically just fuck America everywhere I see it take. Yeah. Which is a, significant number of people.
Bombardments targeting critical infrastructure. Cities like Kharkiv and regions in Donetsk Oblast have seen fierce battles, with Ukrainian defenses crumbling under sustained Russian pressure. The war has also taken a toll on Ukraine's economy and civilian infrastructure, leading to widespread power outages and further complicating their defense efforts. The promises of unyielding support from the West, the US in particular, have proven empty as always. With key allies showing reluctance to fully commit to mere sanctions, it's looking increasingly likely that Ukraine and the West will have to negotiate a settlement that cedes territory to Russia. Only time will tell the specifics, but what is now abundantly clear is that the United States' promises of total victory will not come to fruition.